Hi, everybody. I am Taylor Rooks, and I am thrilled to be your host and moderator for the Race and Accountability panel for Clio Sports. I am joined by an esteemed cast of characters who I'm incredibly excited to talk to. I have Jamil Northcutt, the Vice President of Player Engagement at MLS, Kim Davis, the Senior Executive Vice President of Social Impact, Growth Initiatives, and Legislative Affairs at NHL, and Keith Cartwright, Founder and Chief Creative Officer at Cartwright. So happy to have you guys here, talk to you guys about some things that are incredibly important and incredibly necessary to this sports landscape. So I have a question to begin that is for all of you guys. And I'll begin with you, Kim. What have you learned about being a leader during this social movement?
Gosh, I've learned a lot. I would say that first and foremost has been the need for continuous resiliency. The racial pandemic, alongside the health pandemic, has required all of us to have to look inward, I think, and to think about the work ahead as a movement, not a moment. And I think as leaders, we have to move from the current place of emotion to action. So that requires a lot of resiliency. It requires a lot of grit. It requires a lot of humility. And it requires us to not just be good listeners, but to also see ourselves as good learners as well.
Yeah. Is that what you all have found?
Yeah, for me, diving in here, and thank you for having me. Good to be here. Good to see everybody. Yeah, I think it's one thing about, the resilient piece, but it's also the education. I've noticed that we have such a wide gap in how we were raised, how we were taught, what folks have learned. An example would be, we had a Juneteenth program at MLS, and some of the feedback from it, I received a note from one of my colleagues, and she had actually learned where she was from that the Confederate Army won the Civil War. And so you start to see these things play out in the conversations that we've had, and it's really been good, from an educational standpoint. But for me, as a leader, you start to realize how separated we are and the great gulf that exists between just, from a standpoint of race relations and the work that we need to do to kind of move forward. And we definitely will need, what Kim was saying, the resiliency to make sure that this is a movement, to continue these conversations, to continue to deconstruct some ideologies that have been built, but also learn some new things that will help us move forward and advance.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the more interesting things I found was that most of the information on this movement I took for granted as being common knowledge. And as things started to play out in the media, you realize as a leader, people come to you very quickly and ask for advice. Certainly white people who don't want to be embarrassed, who want to make sure that they're communicating to their employees and their staff in a way that isn't going to get them or their organization in trouble. But that's also a lot to ask. Any human being, especially Black leaders who are dealing with those things in real time every day. And so it's the trajectory for me personally was, I was very in tune and very excited to provide as much information as I could to do these panels and to help. And then I started to realize that, a lot of times it was a shortcut for certain people who didn't want to put in the work and do the research and become true allies. They wanted sound bites, or they wanted affirmation from me before they went out and did the thing that they felt like they had to do. So you balance that now. I do think it is without a doubt a responsibility for all of us to be a part of this. It's not gonna last forever. You can already see it waning. And if our enthusiasm wanes, it's gonna wane a lot faster.
Keith, you raise a really good point with that. And I'm curious, what advice would you give to, other Black professionals who are dealing with having this burden of feeling like they have to educate those who aren't Black? I mean, how do you, handle that?
Well, I think you parse out the question. Sometimes the question is based in action that they're trying to put through, things they're trying to do, right? And then you measure that. If they're trying to put something in place in their organization, the wheels are already moving. They want advice. I'm there for you. Absolutely. Because that's what progress looks like. But if it's just a way to sort of console or to get an opinion on current events or to ask where they can do research and learn, that to me feels lazy. Because I've had the same resources that you do. So why is it that I'm an expert at it? One thing I also say, it's funny, I'm in marketing, and, in my career, oftentimes, I would get asked about things working at ad agencies or get put on things that were directly reflective of my culture, be it music or sports or what have you. And, it was always curious to me because I've spent my entire life, as most Black Americans have, having to study white culture, right? The shows that were on TV, pop culture, for the most part of our lives, has been, aggregated by white culture until we started to influence it in a way that, as today, is, undoubtable. But, the shows that we watched, the things that we learned, the history that we learned, we were forced to study white culture. But for some reason, the thought is that we're not as astute in what goes on in this country and in this world, and we only can speak in the language of Black folks, which is more than a misnomer. So, those are the other things that I think, are interesting and are coming out. It's like, we spend so much time studying your culture. It's your time to study ours and figure out what's going on with our history. That burden's on you.
No, absolutely. And I completely agree. And I think, going off of that, I'm sure that all of us have experienced being the only Black person in the room. At some point in our careers, have experienced being the only person that looks like us in a given setting. And I'm curious, all of you guys hold positions of power at your respective companies. What steps do you feel like you're taking to ensure that that isn't the case, that people of color are represented at all levels, specifically in that C-suite? And I'll start with you, Jamil.
Yeah, so for me, it starts at a much more personal and professional level of what are you doing, for your neighbor. And so we all obviously have been put in a position where we have some influence, and we all have friends and other folks that are out there. We have young people who call us to want to communicate with us and talk with us. So for me, it's me always giving my time to other people and pouring back into other folks, visiting with people, connecting with them, telling them what I know, what I've seen, and providing that advice. But then also there's going to be a chance where there's an opportunity that's going to come across my desk or a colleague's desk, and they're going to reach out. One of the things that we're trying to do is to impact the hiring practices that are out there. And so in order to influence those, we have to have better relationships. And that's one of the things that doesn't really exist as much as it should, particularly within the sports context, yet alone in America. The data is already showing us that we got is less than 1% of CEOs that are out there in Fortune 500 companies. We can look across the board in sports, the numbers are similar. And so we got to do a better job of being at the table, being in the room, but also breaking down these barriers and creating more relationships where it's not just about being in the boardroom. It's about, okay, am I smoking cigars and drinking scotch with other folks when they go out and do that, on a regular basis, to where now we've changed the level of relationships. So now we've become more friends. It's like, the neighbors that live around my neighborhood, we've had this conversation. And what I would question them on is that, who's in your inner circle? I know I have white brothers and sisters that are connected with me, and I'm really always making an effort to integrate. But how many of you guys are integrating yourselves? And so I think those things are critical. And so I'm always pushing my white colleagues to do that. But I'm also pushing the people that I'm taking under my wing personally and pouring into them to try to ensure that I have a list of candidates. When people call me about folks who they want to put into positions, I need to be able to provide them information, and I need to be able to push people forward for those opportunities and for those roles.
Absolutely. What about you, Kim?
As Black leaders in positions of power, we have to use our platforms to promote courage and bold leadership. And for me, that means modeling the behavior that I seek. And so I never leave an organization not being better than I found it in terms of talent. I model what I expect the rest of the organization to do in terms of bringing Black talent to my team. And it's not Black talent, it's top talent. And so I showcase to my colleagues, typically who are not people of color, what top talent looks like through the lens of Black and brown folks. And I've done that for over 35 years. And that helps to build a network. It also helps to show how you identify through your own formal and informal networks top talent, because we are very hyper connected across our networks. And so I think we have to be bold when we find ourselves in positions of power and influence and not waste that time. I think we have to use that time to continue to promote ourselves and the people that we know are going to be the next generation of talent.
Yeah. Now you said something that I think is very crucial, and sometimes it gets lost in this conversation when we're talking about, diversity and accountability and all these things. You said that it's not just Black talent, it's top talent. And too often when you hear companies talk about diversity, it's in the language of like checking off a box, or like just being able to say that I have a diverse staff. But really bringing, Black people and diverse people into your company actually makes your company better. It isn't just about the numbers. It's about elevating, your product and your company. What would your message be to those that maybe aren't understanding that there's an actual, asset from bringing people of color into your business?
The demonstration of that is in the talent itself and how they perform. And I have never been in an organization, I've been in a number of organizations, large organizations from over 300,000 to 500. And in both of those extremes, what I have been able to showcase is that exactly what you said, diverse talent makes the organization stronger and better. The depth of our experiences, along with our preparation, our passion, and the purpose that we have, allows us to be able to contribute in ways that typically folks that haven't had exposure to people that look like us here are shocked by. And then they think that that is an anomaly. And so to continue to be able to educate them on the fact that there is top talent all over this country. And when people say they can't find it, they obviously aren't talking to the right people, because we are such a pool of resources and our networks are so strong that they obviously aren't looking in the right places. And so I think, again, we have to be bold and courageous and use our voices and our platforms to ensure that we are exposing these organizations to the best talent and the best brown and Black talent.
Yeah,
and I
saw you
think
guys
too,
shaking your head, don't you? I can't stand when people say that. If there were not, I'm like, yeah, there were. But go ahead, Jamil.
yeah, but I think it's along the lines of what Keith said earlier. It's like, are you going to be lazy or are you going to do the work? I'll never forget being on a call and talking to some companies about something, and they were just, they brought up the same thing, they just don't have the qualifications, or this is what, here's what I'm hearing that's out here. It's like, okay, did you go Google the Black Trade Organization or that particular field to see if those entities or if they could deliver a candidate to you or give you some advice about who might be out there? And I think, what Keith said earlier about being able to do the work, I think that's not just incumbent on us to do that. I think it's the fact that other folks that are in our profession need to go do that. And that should not be an excuse. There's tons, and we all know this, of Black talent and brown talent that is out there. And we got to make sure that we're pushing on those fronts.
Yeah, I would say on top of that, the data and the research exists. This is not a nice to have. There's an extensive Harvard Business Review, I've said this before, that goes into, finite detail that when you have a diverse staff, your bottom line goes up. So you make more money. Your business is more successful because of these diverse perspectives, because of a sense of inclusion, because of the reputation of your company, because there'll be more outreach, because they feel that reputation grow. So if it's about making money, You don't even need to make it an altruistic thing. You don't have to make it a feel-good thing. You need to, it's not about checking a box. Make it about making money. And if it's about making money, then treat it like an innovation. If you treat it like an innovation, you give it a budget, you make someone accountable, and you hold them to timelines and deadlines, then it'll happen. But if it's not happening and you're throwing your hands up saying you can't find them, that's an obvious, blatant lie, and you're really not interested. And you don't want to make money.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really as simple as that. Yeah. I always love, kind of doing, conversations like this and discussions like this, because it always reminds me that yes, so much has changed, but also so little has changed at the same time. And, Jamil, I know that you have worked at a number of places within the NCAA, NFL, and now MLS. You've seen it all throughout your career. Can you talk to me about the evolution of conversations about race and the focus on the importance of diversity in sports, where it is now as opposed to when you first started in the business?
That's a tough question, because you're trying to always reconcile what you've been saying for so long anyway. And so it's kind of like we're on this Zoom call today with each other. And if I were to mute my mic and still move my mouth, and I'm gonna do that as an example, that's what's kind of happened in the previous years. We've been talking about these issues all the time, but our mics have been muted because whoever is running the Zoom or whoever's the host of this particular arena hadn't really wanted to hear it, and then when you did bring stuff up, they cast you off to the side, you get marginalized, which when you start doing things like that, that creates a fear of retribution. And so marginalization was part of it. Now, given the fact that we were in a global pandemic, there were no sports going on, and you had to just sit in this, people had to start really recognizing that this is an issue and it's a problem. But it took multiple years. I mean, when I was with the Cleveland Browns back in 2014, Tamir Rice was killed. I was part of the first team that really came out and did a protest. Andrew Hawkins ran out of the tunnel with a Justice for Tamir Rice shirt back then. And so all of these issues of race have been taboo. But as it sits now, the good thing about it is that we're able to have a conversation. We're able to, more CEOs and more people are willing to listen more so than ever. I think there's a level of skepticism within the Black community. It's kind of like what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said, we're caught between this history and hope. Will we really make a change or a difference at this moment? But I am encouraged by the fact that we are here. But I've also made a commitment within my own personal self that I'm going to continue to talk about it. I'm going to continue to push. I'm going to continue to encourage other people to move the needle and do what I need to do. One, which is love my neighbor every day. But two, also be a voice and to empower others. So.
Yeah. And Keith, for you, I know you co-founded Saturday Morning with the purpose of bringing awareness and shifting the perception on racial bias and injustice. Through that work, what changes have you seen at a corporate level in those areas? And through that work, what's the biggest change you need to see that you haven't seen?
I think brands want it. I think they're seeing the need for it, certainly now. I think this year more than ever, we've gotten more reach out than we ever have. Brands like Procter & Gamble and Nike and Ben & Jerry's, brands that have been out there, you can see how easily they can sort of maneuver into these conversations, have a point of view, because they'd spent the energy and the time and the effort to educate themselves before the moment hit. But now that the moment is here, the thing we get brands wanting to dive right into the conversation without really understanding what the conversation is about, having no credibility, having done nothing, no sign of action outside of a black box on Instagram. And they want to show up and be as prominent and have as much of a voice and have that thing to hold up in the same way that these other brands that I mentioned have. And you just can't do that. So we talked to them about a timeline to get there, right? So we understand what they want. So we put that at the end of the timeline. And we look at where they are now and we discuss who they are as a brand, what they represent, how they can have this conversation, and then how they can get to the conversation they want to have and do it in a way that's timely and meaningful and impactful. Some timelines are longer than others because some have done more than others. So when it comes to Saturday Morning, that's how we view it. We certainly want to help brands do this. Sometimes there are hard conversations that we have to have with them in order to get there.
Yeah. Now, you know, you brought up something, you know, when you reference, you know, the black box on Instagram. And for, you know, the brands that are maybe watching this, for sports figures and teams that are maybe watching this, can you explain, you know, the difference between performative, you know, activism and people that are coming at change from a very real place, and why the performance activism in a lot of ways can hurt the movement or moment more than anything else?
Yeah, I think it's about the sum of all parts. I think you need to show, and I'm not totally denigrating the black box on Instagram. I think it did show something that we had never seen before, brands at least speaking up and saying what they believe. But in the grand scheme of this conversation, it's a very short-lived moment. And in order to really engage this and turn it into a movement, it's about legislation. It's about brands taking an active stance and doing things that are impactful within their brand to demonstrate what they believe. And those are actions, right? So actions require sacrifice. And there's no sacrifice that's easy to go through. It requires money, it requires time, it requires dedication. And you can judge these brands based on where they are within that group of things that are required in order to show some sort of performative action. So if they haven't done that, and they're just writing checks, which by the way aren't bad, but if that's all they're doing, they can't expect to be, you know, an ample part of this movement in a way that's substantive and helpful as brands who are doing all those things.
Yes.
I think it's just it's really taking a diagnostic of your organization and looking at what you've done, what you want to do, and what you want to say, how it will help you figure out how to say it. But you really, really have to be honest with where you are in the movement.
Okay. No, thank you. That was an amazing way to sum it up. Kim, I know you're wearing your lovely hockey shirt that we all love so much. And, you know, hockey is a sport that I think people do not always associate with people of color. But the NHL is taking many steps to ensure that the public knows where they stand on anti-racism efforts. Can you tell me about some of those initiatives that are happening in the hockey world?
Sure, but let me first respond to or add on to what Keith just talked about, because I think it's an important point to note. You know, as he described brands that were looking at the moment and not the movement, I often refer to that, and I've referred to this over the past 25 years as diversity theater. And I think that, you know, diversity theater is really when a brand promotes itself, but they don't do the real work of culture change and systems change. That is what is required in order for this work to be substantial and for this work to be sustainable. And that happens through actions and accountability. So Keith used the word actions. That is really, really important. The organizations that get it right and have gotten it right and have been able to sustain it over time are those that the CEO sees themselves as the chief diversity officer. The CEO owns accountability and the actions required to change the culture so that the practices in the organization reflect the demographic shifts that we can't say they're coming anymore, they're here. Yeah. For example, in the sport of hockey, of our 31 markets, 24 of those markets, the notion of minority is a misnomer. Millennials and Gen Zers in 23 of our 31 markets are already the majority. And so when I talk to owners about the mandate of change for the NHL, it is exactly about what was said earlier. It's about money in their pocket. It is about the future of the sport being dependent on their ability and our ability to attract the next generation of talent. And that talent is going to be people of color. And that resonates because people understand money. People are in the business of money, and people are in the business of the viability of the sport. And so the 3 years that I've been at the NHL, it has not been difficult to create a rallying cry, because the first thing I did was go to the Brookings Institute and work with an old friend, Dr. Bill Fry, who is the lead demographer at Brookings. And we put together a report that talked about demographic shifts over the 10 years, and the implications on the sport of hockey. And when we put that piece together, we sent that around to all the clubs, and they started calling us, asking to understand this more, because again, those were the facts. And that's the way you really begin to affect systems change. And I think that's when you're in it for the long haul. And that's why people are shocked at the work that we're doing in the National Hockey League. It's because we are leading from a position of facts and profitability, not from a position of charity. This is not about charity, this is about growth.
Yeah. So, and going off that, because you made a great point, you know, where do you, and this is a bit of a loaded question, but where do you see the future of hockey? You know, where do you want the league to take it?
Well, the first thing we have to do is to make sure that the sport is seen as welcoming to Black and brown communities. People have often talked about hockey being too expensive, that the lack of ice, the expense of ice time, and the expense of equipment. But we know from the history of hockey and where hockey originated in Canada, that those were not wealthy families that engaged in hockey. Communities rallied around the players and they exposed kids early. There's no reason that kids of color can't be exposed earlier, and we're doing that. The second thing is, most of the people that play ice hockey today started with ball and street hockey. They didn't start on the ice. They actually learned stick handling on the street. And so we are now re-energizing, particularly in urban communities, the idea of ball and street hockey as a way to expose kids, both in urban and in rural communities where ice may not be available. We're also retrofitting basketball hoops in neighborhoods so that you can connect a hockey net to it and play ball hockey right on a basketball hoop, because those are available in many of our Black and brown communities. So it's really what Keith said earlier. It's about looking at this through the lens of innovation, because when you think about it through the lens of innovation, that's where your growth is going to happen. And that's how we're reimagining how to expose new audiences to the sport of hockey.
I love that. Like, a lot of it is happening at the base level to then, you know, grow the fans from there, which I think is super, super important. Mm-hmm. Jamil, I know you are in constant communication with MLS players, helping them in a variety of ways and in a variety of stages in their career. How have you helped or aided them navigate their feelings, their fears, their wants, their needs, you know, as the country, you know, continues this kind of racial reckoning?
You know, I am them. You know, like I've been a former, you know, I played the other football, American tackle football, but I'm them. I've been in their shoes before. And so, you know, the things around George Floyd, you know, were happening. I'm always in constant communication with them anyway, because I'm always trying to help them go where they want to go. And so it wasn't hard during that time, because that's just what we do within the player engagement function. However, given the emotional state that we all were in as a Black community, our players are 61% Black and brown players within MLS, you know, according to the data that we've gathered around our demographics. You know, again, it's about that shift and kind of what that looks like. So there needs to be a response. So for me, in kind of connecting with the players, is saying, hey, you're not crazy, the fact that you feel the way that you do. But then from there, how do we go from this emotional state, and how do we intellectualize what's happening? And so how we can affect change. So out of that, you know, we had internally, we had an employee resource group that were already meeting. You know, we got y'all, if you guys watch Insecure.
I get the joke.
But then we had initially changed over, and we have a group called Pitch Black, which is our ERG internally, that kind of organically came together even before George Floyd, but then George Floyd just pushed it over the top. After that, you know, connecting with our players, they were organizing. And so instead of them being fragmented from what we're doing, because again, at the end of the day, we're all the same league. We used to say in the NFL, we're all robbing the same train. Everybody wants to make money. Everybody's after the same dollars, et cetera. So we need to be united in our front in what we're trying to do. So it was connecting with those guys, taking emotions. How do we go from anger to action? And then when we get into the room, how do we make a difference? Because it's you have the conversation where you are able to communicate your frustrations, but then it comes a time where, and it's tough, where we have to move beyond how we feel, but take that energy and turn it into a positive. And so that's kind of what we've been able to do from my seat to help our players kind of go in a direction to create some tangible action items out of this, that where we can hold people accountable. We can have some key metrics and KPIs around it, and we can start making a difference. Because, you know, it's tough in this time, because again, it goes back to the whole marketing perspective, which everybody wants to tweet something out. Everybody wants to post something on Instagram. But again, we need to put some meat on the bone at the end of the day and see what we're really doing from a tangible perspective. And our players have done great. They've got some things going on with our U.S. Soccer Foundation, where they're building pitches. I know we've donated a significant amount to the BPC, our Black Players for Change group. And we're also partnering together to work on some initiatives that'll be centered around, you know, soccer upward mobility. We're talking about mobility. How do we educate people? How do we create pathways? How are we advancing individuals? I think we talk about pipeline all the time, but we don't talk about advancement and promotion. So we got to create some movement, et cetera. And then the last piece of that too is policy. What do our policies look like? You know, and how are we affecting change by changing some structural things? Yeah, there's external policies around police brutality, et cetera, but what are we doing internally? We talk about Rooney rules and diversity initiatives, et cetera. We need to be able to put pen to paper and make a difference in those areas as well.
Yeah, and you talked about all the emotions that, you know, the players are feeling right now. And whenever I do something like this and I am, you know, looking, you know, at Black people and I understand how we all feel during this moment, I always just want to ask, you know, how you're doing, like how you're doing mentally. So, I mean, I'll start with you, Keith. Just how are you?
You know, it's not ideal. I mean, I say all the time to our crew, you know, even though we're doing well in the middle of all this as a business, this is not ideal. Like, no one wants to work like this. You know, I'd much rather be sitting next to my brother and sister here having this conversation in a room, because you just there's a different feeling when we're all sitting together. That's just human. So I think we've learned a lot from this process, and I think there's some efficiencies that are going to come out of this that are better for business and better for the environment. But you know, it's not ideal. I think everyone has a, you know, certainly if you're Black and brown, has a sense of, for the most part, I should say, has a sense of wanting. And maybe normal is not the right word, but it's certainly a sense of wanting to return to some level of normalcy. And by normalcy, I mean where we can walk out of our homes and interact with our friends and interact with our business partners and those that we work with, our loved ones, and not be fearful. And there's a lot of things that are be fearful, and it's not just COVID that are going on right now. So all in all, I'm doing okay.
No, I appreciate that very honest answer, and I feel you. What about you, Kim?
Yeah, you know, you miss that sense of belonging, the connection of people, and the sense that you are, you know, in many ways trapped, right? And that's a scary feeling. And even though I'm hopeful and optimistic that this is going to pass, I wouldn't be truthful if I didn't say it's been stressful and wearing. You know, to get in front of the Zoom camera every day, sometimes 6-7 times a day, and it's tough. And you have to cut yourself some slack. You have to be kind to yourself, I think. And I've tried to be kinder to myself during this period.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Jamil?
Yeah, for me, you know, it kind of, truthfully, it ebbs and flows. You know, there are some days that are better than others. You know, I have a family of 6, and so I'm responsible for a lot of folks. You've got things that are going on financially. Again, it's kind of the 3 areas I call kind of the 3-leg table I talk to players about, is just your health, your finances, and your relationships. You know, we got a global pandemic. We got relationships that are not at the best. You know, we have an election coming up that will be interesting. We have finances that are impacted by everybody. And so, like, these 3 legs are being rocked back and forth within our country and in this context. And then you also are thinking about, you know, your role. You know, what are you playing you know, in the office, and the weight that comes with that, and how you're having to be this champion for a lot of folks, you know, who are just not with you in present day, but who's going to come behind, and are these things going to continue to proceed? So those pressures, you still have life going on around you as well. You know, cars are still breaking down. There's things that need to be fixed in the house. Like, all of these different things are compiled with everything that we're dealing in. But, you know, so it ebbs and flows. But even in the midst of that too, you still come back to the realization, you know, I'm a man of faith, and I try to anchor myself in that belief system and trusting in somebody that's bigger than me. And so when I kind of center myself on that, take a few deep breaths and breathe in and breathe out, I find myself back in a place of peace. But I would be lying to you if I didn't say, you know, I have my moments. You know, are we in a position where we're really going to have some real change? But I will say this: I'm not going back to how I used to be. Like, I made a decision that I'm not doing that. And you know, I'm looking at, you know, still right now, Jonathan Price, you know, was killed. We got things that are still occurring in the midst of all of these crises that we've been through, where still some folks have not gotten the fact that we're being abused as a race of people, and that's got to change.
Yeah. You know, and going off of that, that's kind of the last question I wanted to ask you guys before we close out here is, you know, what impact will Black Lives Matter have on sports marketing and culture? Most importantly, is it an impact that will last? And are you seeing anything that makes you feel like it is an impact that will last? And I'll start with you, Keith.
Last is an interesting word. I think we're forever changed in some ways. I think some things will forever be changed. I hope most of the good things will stay changed. You know, but last is a tough word. Nothing lasts forever. Everything is always ever evolving. I think this is the first time in my life that I felt like there has been significant change. And I'm being optimistic, but that there's been significant change in people's mindsets. It was interesting to me seeing during the protest that there were so many white brothers and sisters out there this time. And it wasn't just us fighting for our own rights. Because that tells me that people are starting to understand the injustice of it all. And it's about humanity. It's really interesting when you pair that against, you know, our daily politics and the coronavirus and how all those things work together. So let's see how it looks, you know, 2022, when we hopefully have this pandemic under control and everybody's back to their working lives, catching buses and trains and subways, and see if this change sticks.
But you had me in my feelings there, because I am cautiously optimistic about the future. I too have observed the number of non-people of color who have stepped up and used their platforms, and they understand this as a human rights issue. And that's a change that I haven't seen in literally almost 40 years that I've been in industry. That is something that is different than anything that I've seen over those 40 years. I think it's important for us as leaders in our places to keep the pressure on, to continue to use our voices and to be bold in using the voices to make sure that this doesn't die down, that we do everything to continue the movement, have those courageous and uncomfortable conversations with people. You know, in hockey, it's critical. 93% of our players are white. So we're going to change hockey through allyship more than anything. And that's where the real pivot point has been over the past 6 months in our sport, are the white players who are standing up and wanting to understand and learn more. So I'm optimistic that the future is going to be much brighter.
That's great. Jamil?
Yeah, I don't think that this is something that's going to die off, you know, and a lot of the plans that are being implemented seem to be term strategies and solutions. It kind of goes back to the earlier segment where we talked about financial implications. You know, Black people know how to make money, and Black people spend money too. And if you're trying to grow your fan base, you're trying to connect with a different demographic, like it's good business to do that. You know, we talk about doing things that make sense, SENSE, as well as CENTS. And those are things that are going to lead to some of the, it's not the motivation, but money is essential and it's something that people need. And if we're able to grow business and grow revenues, it's beneficial for everybody. You know, there was a research that came out about from Citigroup, I believe, and it talked about how America has missed out on like $16 trillion based off of the fact of, you know, racism and things of that nature, you know, and if we believe money to be a spiritual asset, it's something that can be created for everybody. The more people that have it, the more people are going to spend it and create an economy for us. So I'm more so optimistic now than I was early on that this will continue. But I also think it starts with just the little small things that we can do. I know we have a lot of grand plans that we're implementing, but again, it just starts with that one-on-one, you and that individual. How are you treating that person every day that you come into contact with? Are you loving your neighbor? Are you making assumptions about that person? Are you assuming that they're going to take your purse? Are you assuming that they're a thief or a criminal? We can't do that. You know, we got to change those behaviors, and we got to look at each individual the way that I feel like God sees us, and we got to love each other. And I think if we do those simple things every day, we got to go to lunch with people that don't look like we do. You know, all of those things matter. And if we start doing those small things, I think we'll have some big results.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think everything that you guys have said on this panel has been super meaningful. And I'll just close out by saying, you know, I always say, like, obviously Black people are very frustrated and sad and angry and hurt right now, but we are so many other things too. You know, we're full of joy and we're creative and we're smart and we're a resilient and powerful people. So just to always make room for those other things as well, I think is very, very important. So I'm sending all of you lots of love and health and happiness. And to anybody who is watching this panel who was wondering, like, what's the first step to begin these conversations? What's the first step to improve my company or my business? Like, it's things like this. Mm-hmm. It's listening and, you know, understanding what other people are going through and experiences that are different than yours. So now after seeing this, you just gotta take step 2. So thank you guys so much for joining the panel and having this conversation with us.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you so much.